Incredible amount of questions, and thank you for hanging around for some additional questions, hopefully later. So now I am lucky enough to get to introduce our next midday presentation, which is called A Holistic Approach to the Gut-Brain Connection and Healthier Aging. And it's going to be presented by Dr. Craig Rubenstein. And let me tell you about him. Dr. Rubenstein graduated with honors from New York Chiropractic College, and he's been in practice since 1989. He's a chiropractor, a certified clinical nutritionist, a diplomat of the American Clinical Board of Nutrition, a fellow and diplomat of the International Academy of Clinical Acupuncture. He also utilizes functional neurology and applied kinesiology in his practice to treat nerve issues, fibromyalgia, gut disturbances, hormonal imbalances, concussions, migraines, and more. Before Dr. Rubenstein speaks, I just wanted to do a tiny bit of housekeeping to remind everyone, please either silence your phones or shut them off. And a favor for the chapter, please take pictures, post your comments on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Aging Life Care New York is LinkedIn. I don't think that we are on Instagram, but definitely Facebook, New York chapter of the Aging Life Care Association. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Craig Rubenstein.
Thank you so much. I haven't spoken to a live group in quite a while. So if I appear that my heart's beating out of my chest, it might just be. I want to thank everyone who put on this event and for inviting me. This should be a lot of fun. So although I've been treating people's guts for over 30 years for lots of conditions, some of which were just mentioned, recently I really embarked on researching the effect of the gut on the brain. I know we see a lot in the news about it, but I wanted to really take a look in the literature. And unfortunately, I'm aging like the rest of us. And, it is a big piece in my family that we have a lot of dementia and Alzheimer's. So my mother's whole family is touched to some degree. And so some of this research is obviously a little self-serving. Today I will share mostly what I've been discovering in the past year or so. Okay, so we heard a little bit about me, so we can skip that slide. All right. So the major thrust of today's talk is going to be about how to create balance in your gut microbiome or your intestinal flora. There's a lot that can be done to help restore normal gut function. If you can do this, reduce intestinal permeability, which we will go into. And in the bottom of all of this is the gut and its effect on the brain. We will delve into what goes wrong, all the reasons or many of the reasons things go wrong in the gut microbiome, and possible solutions on how to take care of that. We will discuss what's called dysbiosis and leaky gut and how it influences conditions, especially those of aging, like neurodegenerative diseases. So if you can read this, yes, you can. So these numbers are a bit crazy. According to the CDC, we spend $4.1 trillion per year on healthcare, and the vast majority of that is on chronic diseases. According to the National Council on Aging, Alzheimer's and dementia makes the top 10 list of chronic diseases. Okay, so 80%. To me, that's amazing. So from the previous stats, we see that over $3.4 trillion is being spent on chronic diseases. And if nearly 80% of that is due to things that we can change, not our genetics, that means that almost $2.8 trillion could be saved every single year if people ate better, exercised, managed stress, didn't smoke, didn't drink much. So just getting some of this correct, we could probably solve our whole national debt problem. Now, this is a scary chart, and in red, we see where the United States is. I know we think we have the greatest healthcare system in the world, but the numbers really don't lie. To me, it seems like we really need another way to deal with this healthcare crisis. We need a whole new model. To me, it's something a little more holistic, dealing a lot with the epigenetics, not just the genetics. So when one understands that lifestyle, which is really epigenetics, its effect on health, that we want to treat the causes as much as possible and not just the symptoms. The Time magazine, Discover magazine, recently described inflammation as the cause of chronic disease. Actually, inflammation itself is a symptom. All diseases basically are associated with inflammation, but it's the cause of the inflammation that really needs to be uncovered. So these are important concepts, and we will get to these. But first, there are approximately 100 trillion microorganisms living in our gut. The vast majority are bacteria, but there are other microorganisms such as fungi and viruses and something called archaea. Archaea are similar to bacteria, but different. Now, all those microorganisms, they're not just freeloaders. They do a lot for us, and we offer them a place to live. They make nutrients for us, including vitamin K, good fatty acids, and a number of the B vitamins. They even make serotonin and other neurotransmitters. They protect us from letting the bad bugs take over our guts. They stimulate our immune systems and prevent leaky gut and what is called leaky brain, which we will get into. So we may have all heard this quote from Hippocrates. So the more we do research, the more we see that he may have been correct, or at least close to correct, that all disease begins in the gut. So we're going to take a look at two very different stories. Similar issues, but different treatments. Unfortunately, the first story is that of my mother's. So my mother was quite healthy until she was about 75. I remember on her 75th birthday party, she was dancing around like a teenager. Then she went on a vacation, and I remember her telling me that she had this whole bowel thing going on, and she was waking up night after night with abdominal pain and having to run to the bathroom. And unfortunately, nothing was found by her primary care physician. But then within 6 to 8 weeks, she started becoming symptomatic with joint and body pains and was subsequently diagnosed with RA, and then later polymyalgia rheumatica. And then the whole downward spiral began as she was put on tons of prednisone to just try to keep everything in check. When I asked my mother if she wanted to go the natural route, she told me, if nothing else works, I'll consider it. Unfortunately, she's now just about 87 next week, and she still hasn't decided to take the natural route. And as we speak, she's hopefully getting out of a rehab actually today and going back to her assisted living. She fell, broke a few more bones because she's been on prednisone now for about 10 or 12 years, at times being on as much as 100 milligrams per day. So big problem. So the next lady is Lucy. She was a patient of mine probably over 20 years ago. Early on in her disease, she wanted to go the holistic, more functional, nutritional approach. She too was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and it wasn't easy. And I worked with a few other holistically minded practitioners, and it took a long time, but life became one of possibilities, whereas my mother's has been just one of increasing disabilities as time has gone on. So as you might have guessed, Lucy's treatment began by fixing her gut microbiome. So dysbiosis, I don't know how many people are familiar with this term. I feel like it's all over the news, but I think when you are studying something for so long, you see it everywhere, like buying a new Toyota and all you see are Toyotas on the road. So what is dysbiosis? At a minimum, it's an imbalance of the bacteria that's supposed to be in your gut, what's called your commensal bacteria. At worst, it involves infection with some kind of pathogenic bacteria or fungi or some type of parasites or protozoan, or even some overgrowth of some of those archaea that we spoke about. This is a cover of a book, but I like the picture. The gut-brain communication is a two-way street. And when it's disrupted in dysbiosis and leaky gut, it becomes a big problem. Whether you have obvious intestinal symptoms such as loose stools, abdominal pain, constipation, bloating, etc., or not, this disruption is linked to everything from anxiety and depression to even autism and neurodegenerative diseases. So the importance of the gut-brain axis has been revealed by lots of even human studies, not just animal studies, that demonstrate a correlation between the altered gut microbiota and neurological disorders, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, anxiety, dementias of other sorts, and depression. Dysbiosis and increased intestinal impermeability, aka leaky gut, are key factors in this process. So leaky gut is just a lay term for increased intestinal permeability. One of the hallmarks of dysbiosis is oftentimes an overabundance of something called LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. It's an endotoxin released from gram-negative bacteria. So if you remember from biology class, you have gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. The gram-negatives have this LPS in their outer membrane. So the LPS, which is released by these gram-negative bacteria, causes a release of another funny-sounding compound, zonulin. And that's released by the lining of the intestines, the enterocytes. The effect of the LPS and the zonulin disrupt the tight junctions. Tight junctions are these junctions between the intestinal cells that are supposed to be tight and not cause anything to be able to go through those tight junctions. Interestingly enough, even gliadin, which is part of gluten, has also been found to upregulate zonulin release in certain people with or without celiac disease, and thereby increasing gut permeability or leaky gut. So, as the slide says, you have a leaky gut when the lining of your intestines becomes too porous, which then allows things to pass into your bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So let's say you're eating a particular food, a carrot. And if a small little tiny microscopic piece of that carrot gets absorbed into your bloodstream before it's fully digested, your immune system is going to see that as something foreign and create antibodies. And that's in general how certain food intolerances and food allergies can start, which you could imagine if there's a leaky gut, more of these things leak through into your system. So I'm sure you already understand that a healthy gut flora, glad that's not me, as I am waiting for a phone call. So the healthy gut will help prevent a leaky gut. So what does leaky gut look like, and what are the causes? I really like this picture because you can see on the left side, looks pretty red here. I don't love that, but it should be pink. I was a little worried about some of the colors on this. But that's the pinker side, and the intestinal lining. You can tell that there are some small areas where there's some division between the cells. Those are supposed to be there, but the rest of the cells are tightly joined by these tight junctions. On the right side, what looks like a dried up riverbed would be the leaky gut side. You could imagine that with all those different cracks, the LPS or other bacterial fragments and other toxins could just fall right through those cracks and get absorbed into your bloodstream. So what happens when this barrier is disturbed? You will get translocation of microbes. That's just a more scientific term for what we've touched upon already, which is the idea that the microbes that are in your gut can actually escape out through the leaky gut and go into your bloodstream. How does this happen? Again, we saw that the lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, which is also called endotoxin, causes the release of the zonulin from the gut cells, the enterocytes, and then the tight junctions open up, and that allows especially the overabundance of gram-negative bacteria such as Bacteroides fragilis, certain types of E. coli, Proteus mirabilis to be able to get out of the intestines. As we mentioned earlier, those tight junctions are so important because they really dictate how porous your intestinal lining is or should be. About that, okay. So the concept of food allergy or food intolerance we spoke about a little bit. This is, what happens when the gut isn't working properly. Now, I don't know how many people are familiar with the different immunoglobulins, but anywhere where there are secretions, whether that's the lungs, the sinuses, the intestines, your mouth, you have what's called secretory IgA. That's one type of immunoglobulin that's created and can be involved in certain food. We won't call them allergies, they're more intolerances. What are classically called allergies are IgE, and then there are other types of immunoglobulins like IgG that are involved, and even T cells can be involved in different types of intolerance or food allergies. But again, most of this happens when there is dysfunction inside the gut, and you can have a lot of these secretory IgA molecules being made, or in the bloodstream or in the tissues when things escape out of a leaky gut. Molecular mimicry, that's a really scary one to me. And it's the way I believe, and in the literature you see how a lot of autoimmune problems begin. And from what we will see as we go on, you'll see the role that may have in this whole neurodegenerative disease process. The basic concept of molecular mimicry is that certain microbial or environmental antigens share a structural similarity with tissues in your body. The easiest way to understand this are strep throat infections. We all know that strep throats want to be treated right away. Most doctors, if you have strep, you go right on an antibiotic. So why is that? Because we know that if strep is not treated, the body will make antibodies against the strep. And because it makes an antibody against a certain row of molecules on the strep bacteria, that exact row of molecules is also found in the heart valves or in the kidneys or in the joints. So you can get rheumatic heart disease, you can get glomerulonephritis. Now, to believe that the body only makes this, let's call it an error with strep, would be a little short-sighted. So there's this whole theory out there that if you just Googled molecular mimicry, you would see probably for the last 75 years or so, they've been talking about it in the literature. There's a lot of different microbes that have been associated with different autoimmune disease states. I've seen it at times with patients when we've been treating them from autoimmune disease, when they have a flare-up. If we run particular types of stool analysis, we'll see they may have a certain parasite or a certain pathogenic bacteria that comes up. And I've seen that a few times with particular patients, including Lucy, who we went over before. She had about 3 big flare-ups when she was doing quite well. And each time we found something like Klebsiella pneumonia in her stool. Okay. So leaky gut pathophysiology. So now we know that in regard to aging, neuroinflammation, neurodegenerative processes are increased by intestinal permeability. So we see here that leaky gut or altered intestinal permeability can be caused by all of these different things, even something as simple as low stomach acid. And I bring this one up in particular because there was a recent study that some of you may have seen that long-term PPI use was linked to higher risks of dementia. So why would that be? There's probably many reasons. Low stomach acid leads to poor mineral absorption. Minerals are catalysts in many cellular activities, and not having enough could be problematic. Low stomach acid also is not going to be your normal defense mechanism. A normal amount of stomach acid would, if you happen to eat something that has bacteria in it or parasites or something, enough stomach acid would help get rid of that problem. And there are other things like pancreatic enzymes and bile from your gallbladder that all have an effect of trying to keep any of the bad bugs out of the system. Now, many of these causes of increased intestinal permeability, will obviously have a big impact on the level of different types of bacteria in your gut. Okay. So these are just some of the conditions or diseases that are associated with dysbiosis. We touched on a few of them already. Of course, today I'm mainly focusing on the neurodegenerative diseases, but even colon cancer and diabetes and obesity, which we're going to get back to later, you'll see there's sort of a full circle, that we come full circle with some of these things. So there's a lot of research confirming or suggesting that most ill health, whether physical or mental, has a connection to your gut. That's the whole idea of all disease begins in the gut. So in some ways, it's a bit scary, but the good part is there's something you can do about it. So this was a really interesting research paper in 2021, the paper entitled Multi-Pathogen Infections and Alzheimer's Disease. The hypothesis that Alzheimer's disease could be in part caused by multimicrobial infections in the brain. And this paper had about 100 references supporting this, and it could be anything from viruses to bacteria, fungi, and parasites. And many of them, of course, implicate the gut microbiome as being part of the problem. The basic concept is that the brain tissue in Alzheimer's disease are infected by numerous microbes producing neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration, and an immune system response that actually produces amyloid beta peptide. We all know about amyloid plaques in the whole pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease, but it's also actually been found to be antimicrobial. So it may be the brain's attempt to get rid of these microbes that produces the amyloid, which is then part of the problem of neurodegeneration in Alzheimer's. So let's look at one common bug, Candida, a type of fungi. It's probably the most studied of all the fungi in humans. And as you can see from here, the stats say that 63% of people have Candida in their gut and 11% have an overgrowth. So even if Candida doesn't leak out of your gut, it can easily lead to an immune reaction inside your gut. And then other things like yeast and mold and other types of fungi can also stimulate that as there's a cross-reactivity. That could be anything from live yeast or stuff that's already been made into bread and other products that we eat every day. Once that gets into the intestines, you can have this immune flare in the gut. So once the immune system begins to react this way, the level of inflammation in the gut increases, and then that goes into your systemic circulation, creating more of a systemic inflammation. So Candida overgrowth in your gut will disrupt the microbiome, of course, and be part of all the problems that we're talking about. Okay. So these are risks for systemic candidiasis. That's the fancy name for Candida that gets into your whole system. Now, years ago, I would have conversations with different medical people, and they said this was only possible in people with AIDS or some other disease that really trashed their whole immune system. So the other piece of this, that a lot of these risk factors are like the chicken or the egg scenario. So systemic Candida may be caused by some of these issues, okay? But then Candida can also cause some of these risk factors like autoimmune disease or diabetes. So as you can imagine, this can become quite a vicious cycle as one causes another, and then that feeds back. So one course of antibiotics may not be enough to totally destroy your gut microbiome, but you could imagine that multiple rounds over a short period or multiple rounds over years and years over a lifetime could definitely be a problem. You now mix that with someone who loves carbs, who's getting older, who has a terrible diet, maybe some hormonal imbalances, and it's very easy to see how you could wind up with a Candida or some type of a fungal overgrowth. So this was a very interesting quote. So if Candida enters the bloodstream, the yeast may overgrow. The overgrowth of Candida may also spread or occur in other parts of the body, including the liver, spleen, heart, eyes, lining of the abdomen, and abdominal organs, the peritoneum, kidney, bone, lungs, and the covering of the spinal cord and brain. And you can see this was from Department of Health and Human Services. So if you happen to be one of those that has the overgrowth of Candida, which is 11%, as we saw on a previous slide, and you wind up having, let's say, long-term cortisone treatment, like my mother, or some other type of immune suppressing medications, let's say something like, maybe we shouldn't name names, but autoimmune, some of the biologics that are out there for rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or other autoimmune diseases, you could see how this will become a problem very quickly, and it could spread throughout your whole system. So let's see if you could read that. Yes, okay. As reported in this study, innate immune and fungal model of Alzheimer's disease. So the first one we looked at was a multi-pathogen model for Alzheimer's. This one is about a fungal model for Alzheimer's. When they did autopsies on the brains of people with Alzheimer's, nearly 90% had antibodies to numerous fungal forms, Candida being the most widespread, as compared to only 10% in the controls. In this study, fungal species were identified in the brains of Parkinson's disease patients, again upon autopsy. So the important piece here is that even without any type of digestive symptoms, you have a 40% chance of having what's called SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And there's two different kinds. There's one that is mainly dealing with the type of bacteria that produces a lot of hydrogen, and another that produces methane. It's actually not really bacterial, that's an archaea, but you can do breath tests to see if somebody has this problem. So now we go into the bacteria in Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of recent studies found that numerous bacteria, not just one type, have been found to be infecting the brains of those with Alzheimer's. And some have actually seen sort of a cohabitation of the bacteria with what's called Candida biofilms. I guess I'll describe what biofilms are now. Not a common thing that you hear in the news these days. So a biofilm will be when bacteria or fungi, it's as if they were joining hands and being unable to be pulled apart, and they create this very difficult to penetrate either layer or surface area. So even when someone is taking antifungals or antibacterials, if you have these biofilms, they're very, very difficult to penetrate. They are trying to find certain different compounds to help break up these biofilms. One natural one is NAC, N-acetylcysteine. So that's used often when you think there is a biofilm problem before giving whatever antimicrobial that you might be using. So this was a recent paper entitled Infectious Microorganisms Seen as an Etiological Agent in Parkinson's Disease. So this one states that infection may be a primary etiological factor or at least a contributing factor to its progression. It reviews a number of hypotheses in regard to the cause of Parkinson's and dysbiosis. So again, this imbalance in the gut and its relation to Parkinson's. And they feel that it is a major player. As another paper puts it, current evidence strongly suggests that some forms of Parkinson's disease may originate in the gut. Just to mention, if anyone later wants a copy of references, someone will supply my email address. You could email me and I'll give you a long list of stuff to study. So we have some more scary stats, and parasites always seem to be the scariest to most patients. So of all the microbes, this one always seems the worst, although it may not be. Most people think of tapeworms and 2-foot long things growing in their intestines. Most stuff is microscopic. The takeaway here is that possibly up to 85% of people in the United States have had or have a parasite. So that's a real big number. Now, numerous parasites in different studies have been implicated as part of the infectious disease process that is thought to be a significant factor in different neurodegenerative disease processes. Toxoplasma gondii is one of the most well-known in the literature. Now, it may not be the one that's a huge microbiome parasite, but we'll talk about this a little more later as we go on. So this has to do with what we put in our bodies and what may be affecting the gut microbiome and throwing it off. So we look at something like maltodextrin, super common in tons of foods that if you start reading labels, you'll see it everywhere. But that one actually enables invasive strains of E. coli to adhere to the intestinal cells and grow into a biofilm, as we discussed earlier, causing dysbiosis and a lot of inflammation of the lining of the intestines. Polysorbate 80, another big one, which is an emulsifier. That one causes actual translocation of different types of pathogenic E. coli across the intestinal cells and into the bloodstream. Artificial sweeteners such as Sweet and Low or saccharin, Splenda, sucralose, NutraSweet, etc., cause dysbiosis, and ironically, and this part is killing me, causes blood sugar problems and weight increase, even though it's used to try to help those problems. So here in the US, we love the idea of the one pill fix, and who wouldn't? But unfortunately, many of these, one pill fixes create a lot of collateral damage. I heard people asking questions earlier, and they were talking about all these different medications that the elderly are on. And, we all see a lot of terrible side effects from these things. In this gut, we can see how certain drugs actually create dysbiosis or disturb the gut microbiome, which then will cause leaky gut and all the problems that we've been talking about. We had a slide similar to this earlier, so we'll dive into each one of these concepts. So does someone have parasites, candida, overgrown bad bacteria such as in SIBO? What's disturbing the gut? Does someone have enough good bacteria, which is something we'll talk a lot about later? Because if you don't have good bacteria that's not policing your gut, that's another issue. Is my microbiome producing enough what are called short-chain fatty acids? Short-chain fatty acids are made by specific good bacteria, and that is actually fuel for those enterocytes, the cells that line the intestines. Am I digesting my food? So even in certain simple stool tests, they could measure the amount of meat fibers or vegetable fibers that are coming through, and none should come through. If they're viewing this, then your digestion is not very good. Do you have a leaky gut? There's different testing that could be done to measure this, dysbiosis, even malabsorption. And then the long run, is it causing systemic inflammation or neural inflammation? These are all important questions to try to understand if there is any type of leaky gut or gut microbiome dysbiosis. So specialized labs seem to be able to do a much better job at finding this than some of our usual big players, especially here in New York. I won't go on a whole diatribe about it, but New York has blocked most of the what I call specialty labs from doing really good testing, whereas in 49 other states, there's not a problem. So something's going on here. So this is a front page from one of the labs that I really like, and we'll sort of go into each part of this so you get a better understanding of what type of testing is actually available out there. So gut diversity is measured in two ways. You see Shannon's index and Simpson's index. Shannon's is about the richness or the breadth of the good bacteria that you have, or the commensal bacteria, while Simpson's is more about the evenness or the depth of that good bacteria. So you could have a lot of good bacteria, but it's possible that there's a lot of imbalance in them. Whereas the Simpson's index will see how even that is. So this part of the test, if you could read it, yes, good, shows the imbalances you have for measuring the normal bacteria in your gut, whether you most likely have intestinal permeability, whether you might have SIBO, et cetera. This was one of my patients this year. And this really wasn't too bad. There was nothing in the red zone. There's a lot of stuff in the green, but this was just a good example of what can be looked at through the different levels. And these bacteria are measured by their DNA. So nothing has to be cultured anymore, which is a huge game changer. So this part of the summary page just talks about which commensal bacteria are not in balance, whether they are considered probiotics or not. There's also an area that talks about what types of natural supplements might be able to be used. And the middle section talks about which probiotics were actually found to be low. And we'll get into that a little bit more and how important that could be. On this page, it shows whether there are any gut pathogens. This was taken from a particular patient. This one showed that they had an overgrowth of the Candida albicans and other Candida species. There's also this section on antibiotic resistance that can actually measure whether you have genes for antibiotic resistance, which if you're using medical pharmaceuticals, this could be very important. On the bottom, we see that there's an overgrowth of one particular bacteria and also a type of an amoeba, Entamoeba histolytica. So knowing this can be very important. In these particular patients, they had no gut symptoms that were different than most people. Maybe they didn't move their bowels every day. Maybe they had a little gas once in a while. Maybe once in a while they could have a touch of loose stools. But these people were not running into the GI doc saying that they must have IBS or IBD. Okay. So on this page of the report, it shows the levels of different short-chain fatty acids. As we mentioned, those are the fuel for the enterocytes, the cells that line the gut. If you don't have enough of these, you don't have enough fuel, the intestinal lining will dysfunction. And once again, we come up with leaky gut at that point and inflammation of the gut lining. Okay, so these are in specific inflammatory markers, and some of this can be run through stool tests through regular labs, but you can't get all of this done through any regular laboratories. You do need some of the specialty labs. See if there's anything important to mention. We could go through each one of these, but each one has a different area of inflammation involved. The last one I'll talk about, the fecal eosinophil protein X, that's high either because you have a lot of true food allergies or because you have a parasite. So even through the parasite testing in a lot of these really good labs, they do not have the genome mapped out of every single parasite, so they may not be able to find the exact one that you have. But when you look at a more general or not call it general marker, you'll have a good idea if this is a person that may have a parasite. Okay. So here I'm only going to talk about, I think, 3 of these. We talked a little bit about secretory IgA. That's that SIGA. We see here it's in red because it's actually low. What this means is that this person's immune system in their gut is not functioning very well. That may be due to infection or other reasons. Often if we see it high, we know there's some kind of an infectious process, but low could be very similar. And that's not a good sign. If your immune system in your gut isn't working properly, you're doomed, basically. You're going to have a lot of gut-related stuff going on. Zonulin, which we see on this particular person, was good. That's the protein that regulates the permeability, as we mentioned. This was one of the few people that showed okay with. So of course, I'm usually not running this testing on people that are perfectly healthy, right? Now, another really great thing is this fecal anti-gliadin marker here. If someone does have celiac and this number is high, that means they're getting in some gluten somewhere that they are unaware of, or they may not be totally honest with you that they're really adhering to a strict anti-gluten diet. But many people will show this that don't know that they have any type of a gluten sensitivity. And this is not a super sensitive marker. So if it's showing high, it's a definite problem. This was a study, they were looking at zonulin, that chemical that causes leaky gut, because they're looking to potentially make a drug that could interrupt this process. So even the pharmaceutical houses are seeing what's going on in the gut, and they're looking to change that in order to affect the gut-brain axis. This paper was, I don't have the date here, but most of this stuff is within the last 5 to 8 years. Okay, weeding, something we all hate to do in the garden, but we need to do it in the gut. So after using some of the best testing that you can do, you can get a better understanding what might need to be weeded out, whether that's an overgrowth of these gram-negative bacteria, whether it's parasites, whether it's some kind of candida or fungi. So without weeding out the bad guys and rebalancing your gut, if you take a garden example, it's going to get overrun by the weeds. So it's the same thing, whether we're talking about gardening or in the gut. Okay, so weeding fungi naturally. There are plenty of different antifungals that are natural. One of the biggest ones is undesolenic acid. That one I've probably been using for over 30 years. There are other ones such as caprylic acid, which is also a type of a medium chain fatty acid. Berberine, we've probably all heard of berberine in the news. And we will talk about this a little bit more. It's found in a bunch of different medicinal herbs. It's been used forever, especially for diarrhea that's of an infectious nature. A lot of us have probably heard people are using it now to balance blood sugar and other things. And again, we'll talk about that one a little bit more. Garlic has been used for centuries, grapefruit seed extract, a fancy one, pau de arco, and they all work a little bit differently. And that's why a lot of antifungal supplements will have 3, 4, or 5 of these in it in order to try to attack the fungi from different angles. So here we go with another study. This was 2015, where fungal DNA was extracted from the brain samples. And there were many different fungi or different species of fungi that were found. There were no evidence of fungi in the brains of the controls. So this gives us, very compelling evidence that fungal infection is part of the Alzheimer's brain. Since 2015, lots of other studies, some of which we already went over. So now we go into the bacteria. Lots of different things that could be done if there's an overgrowth of bacteria. We'll go over a different study in a few minutes. Berberine, again, is one of the really good natural supplements for killing off bad bacteria. Grapefruit seed extract is another. So, yeah, I did this slide twice, I think. Sorry about that. Okay, so herbal therapy is equivalent to rifaximin for the treatment of SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. So in this study, they took 4 different natural products that are actually available, and they matched that against a typical antibiotic treatment for SIBO. And they basically found that they worked pretty similar. They even did a washout period, and if the herbs didn't work well, then they gave the antibiotics, and if the antibiotics didn't work well, they then gave the herbs, and they saw, even more people would get better. So weeding out parasites. Okay. So lots of antiparasitics out there on the market. Probably one of the biggest ones is Artemisia, which there have been some good studies on, including for that Toxoplasma gondii. Okay. I mentioned earlier that Toxoplasma is not a real big gut disturber, but it does come into the gut first. It proliferates in the gut, and then goes out into the rest of the system. If you have a really good gut that's working properly, that could help prevent this from happening in the first place. Okay, so this was the study that I mentioned earlier from 2023. This was really provocative for me when I started seeing this and how many different pathogens were related to Alzheimer's and how many could be related to the gut. This is also on Toxoplasma gondii, and this one specifically talks about Artemisia, which is, again, one of the most common antiparasitic herbs out there on the market. You can see, good. So they measured different bacteria or viruses or fungi actually in the brain of people. They also looked in the blood for antibodies, and they went into the gut, and they can see that there's a pretty significant disturbance, not just in the gut, but also in the brain of people with neurodegenerative diseases. This particular slide came out of an Alzheimer's study. So once you've cleared out all the bad guys, then we worry about seeding the gut with the good guys. So you want to put in the probiotics that you're low on, and you want to be able to fertilize that with things like prebiotics. So probiotics are the good bacteria. The prebiotics, such as inulin, are the food source for good bacteria. So we've all heard of acidophilus and maybe bifidobacteria, or some fancier ones, Saccharomyces boulardii, or Bacillus coagulans, which is actually great for C. diff, by the way. Those are all really good probiotics that help police your gut. So some will colonize the gut, like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, and others, like the Bacillus coagulans, are in for a few weeks, do their job, and then leave. Those are usually what are called soil-based organisms. That could bring up a whole nother story about the hygiene hypothesis, and if everything is way too clean, you're going to be missing out on these soil-based organisms that have a really good effect in your intestines. So the prebiotics are different types of fibers or carbohydrates that are actually fuel for your good bacteria. Something like fructooligosaccharides are a common one that you may see in products that are being marketed. They'll also, to feed good bacteria, you could use resistant starches. That could be anything from chicory or bananas that are green to raw potato. Definitely not my favorite ingredient, but it works well. Now, this is not a full list of this particular lab's probiotics, but you can get an idea how important this is. In green, you see the probiotics that are in good numbers. In red, you see the ones that are low. Now, how many times has someone said, or maybe you've said, I took a probiotic, it didn't help? What if you're taking a probiotic that has all the good bacteria that you already have, and none of the ones that you don't have? So doing very specific testing, and most people come up with somewhere between 4 and 7 probiotics that they're actually low on. This, as in some of the other testing, is done through DNA. So they're measuring the amounts of DNA coming out in a stool sample. If you can give the patient or yourselves the probiotic that has all of the ones that you're low on, and usually you can do that, you'll all of a sudden have people saying, wow, that probiotic really works. Now, of course, that's not going to be someone with dementia. It's not going to be that simple that they take this probiotic and after a bottle, they're thinking clearer. But someone who does have some other symptoms, you can see a quick result when you're giving them what they really need. Okay, so this looks like a previous slide, but this is the modifiable risk factors for neurodegenerative diseases. We may have heard this concept that Alzheimer's or dementia is diabetes type 3. So blood sugar problems have definitely been related to dementia and Alzheimer's, not as much as Parkinson's, but to some degree. But we see there's all of these different risk factors. And as I was talking about earlier, is many of these risk factors are also caused by leaky gut. So we wouldn't just want to treat the diabetes. we'd want to say, why do they have diabetes? Is it just genetic, or are there epigenetic problems? Is there a gut connection? Obesity, tons of studies showing that obesity can be linked to dysbiosis in the gut. Infection, we've spoken about a little bit. Inflammation was a big piece of this whole lecture, how a lot of systemic inflammation, and thereby inflammation in the brain, is caused by a disturbed gut microbiome. Nutritional factors, we went over the idea that different B vitamins are made in the gut. There are so many studies talking about sleep disorders that are related to the gut, so on and so forth, including, fatty liver disease. So we have this big full circle that even a lot of the risk factors that are mentioned in the literature can also come back to the gut that's all disturbed. Okay, coming up to the last few slides. I just pulled out a few titles of studies to talk about, or to underline what I was just talking about. So we see in the middle gut microbiome and its impact on obesity and obesity-related disorders such as diabetes, hypertension. Those are all part of the risk factors of neurodegenerative disease. The role of gut microbiota in infectious and inflammatory diseases, not just inflammation in the gut, but in the whole body. This is causality of gut microbiome and hypertension, another risk factor. This one talks about intestinal permeability and systemic inflammation again, and then B vitamins and their roles in gut health. This one's more specific, risk of neurodegenerative disease in patients with sleep disorders. And again, we go back to some sleep disorders have a relationship to the gut. Okay, thank you. Okay. Time for questions if you have any. It couldn't have been comprehensive enough that you learned everything. Okay. Give me a softball.
Broad softball. So what should we do? We're in the one state where we can't get tested. And what should we do with our patients, ourselves, and our mothers?
Right. So there are ways of getting tested. The one particular lab that I use will send test kits actually into New York, which many companies won't even send a test kit into New York. After collecting the sample, you just have to sign a piece of paper that says you didn't collect your sample in New York. And then you just mail it from New York, and it's fine. So, or you could go to another state and have these tests done much more readily. I have had people actually get the kit, go across the border, spend the night in a hotel because they weren't comfortable not doing it that way. So it is possible to do it. I think you're sort of shooting in the dark without more information. So I do think testing really helps a tremendous amount, because each one of those areas, and that wasn't even the full test, there's a different way of treating each part. Some may be by diversifying your diet. When people come into me and they only eat the same 12 foods all the time, the breakfast is exactly the same, their lunch is almost always exactly the same, and they have 3 different dinners a week. You know their diversity in their gut microflora are going to be not very diverse. So diversifying the diet is huge. Possibly having different fermented foods, whether it's sauerkraut or kefir or yogurt, as long as they're not loaded with sugar, is another general step. So there are general steps, but if you really want to be specific, and for someone like myself, where on my mother's side of the family, all of her siblings have either full-blown dementia or some dementia and some Alzheimer's, I want to be a little more specific.
I have 2 questions. One, there's a lot of controversy about over-the-counter probiotics. Time release, they're not valuable, they are valuable. Can you tell us whether we should, pursue probiotics? It's something we should recommend for our patients.
Right. So there are companies, and I'll call them doctor-only companies, although you can often find them on the internet or through certain kind of specialty pharmacies. Like here in Manhattan, Wilner Chemists is probably one of the better sources of what I would call doctor only. Am I allowed to mention names?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so companies like Thorne Research, companies like Pure Encapsulations, Metagenics, and some others, they will send all their products out for assay to independent labs, get them back, make sure what they say on their label is correct. So I trust those, whether I'm dispensing those out of my own office or I'm telling people here in the city to go to Wilner Chemists, or if they're ordering it online. I do get nervous about online because there are even, what do you call them, fake supplements with the right label on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think using a doctor-only company is the way to go. And I do think if you don't know which probiotics you're low on, that you would rotate many different probiotics throughout the year.
Oh, okay.
Second
My
question.
second question. There are a lot of wacky things in the news these days. One of the wacky things is that they were testing our sewage to determine the prevalence of COVID. And there are a lot of people who are suffering with long haul COVID. And I'd like you to address whether this is something that there are studies about the relationship between the gut and COVID, long haul COVID.
You know, I'm starting to look into it because I'm running into more people coming in with this. But the few people that I've had come into the office, none were willing to run the testing that I wanted them to run. So we were kind of shooting in the dark. You know, we've helped some, but that each one has been different. I haven't seen a specific sort of process in everyone. Are there studies out there talking about it? Absolutely. You probably saw in the New York Times recently, there was something about the gut and serotonin and long COVID. They've lumped long COVID now into fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome because there's so many commonalities. They've been looking at different chronic viruses, again, other than just COVID, that may be why people have this. There was probably the first study with long COVID and the microbiome showed that they measured the microbiome of people that came into the hospital with COVID. They saw they had dysbiosis, and the ones that actually developed long COVID still had dysbiosis 6 months out. So it does look like fixing the gut is of utmost importance, but no one's talking about, oh, there's this particular imbalance. It's these 4 probiotics. It's this one inflammatory marker that's a problem. When you look at it, there's so many inflammatory markers that have been associated. So I don't have any good information on that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Hi, I wanted to ask a question about artificial sweeteners and also like water. I mean, I know that I'm convinced about the gut being very important, but a lot of our clients, older generation, don't drink a lot of water and also enjoy not only coffee, alcohol, but also Diet Coke. So I notice a lot of people have Diet Coke addictions. What would you do with somebody you're trying to...
Well, of course, I try to get them off of Diet Coke, but I wouldn't really want them on regular Coke either, especially for neurodegenerative problems, you know, we have a whole blood sugar issue going on. So to me, water, you know, flavored seltzer, et cetera. Some people don't like seltzer because of the CO2 in it. It's a whole lot better than any of these diet drinks. So I don't have a great solution. I remember I sat across the table from my mother 2 years ago. She handed me her most recent blood test from the assisted living. And I said, oh my God, Mom, you're full-blown diabetic. She said, no, I'm not. I'm a couple of points below. I said, a couple of points below? Your fasting bloods are over 150 and your A1C was 7.2. No, that's a little below. I said, who gave you this? She said, the doctor at the assisted living. I said, he didn't say you had diabetes? And she said, no. And this whole thing, I said, she says, well, maybe I could do something about it with diet. And I said, okay. So we were out at a Chinese restaurant. And I said, well, you see those noodles in front of you? Can't eat those. She finished the bowl. The food comes out. I say, Ma, the rice? Can't do that white rice. Half the bowl, gone. And then I say, and absolutely no dessert. Pistachio ice cream, please. So I said, all right, Mom, you've got very few wonderful things in your life except for food right now. So, I told her doctor to put her on metformin, which actually just brings up one more thing, which thank you. There was a recent study that just showed that people that are on metformin, if they're taken off metformin, they have a much higher risk of developing dementia quickly. So if people are on metformin, keep them on metformin. Metformin is also one of the few drugs that actually helps the microbiome. And they think that may be part of the way it's helping with diabetes, not just through some of the usual chemical processes. Okay.
Oh, please, Anne.
Thank you very much. I know the latest sexy drugs are these obesity drugs, the Wegovy and Ozempic and all these ones. And we're seeing a lot of marketing and pharmaceuticals, and they're like the quick fix to, fast lose weight. And people are thinking they can eat it gives them a quick way to lose weight. But I also realize that there may be other effects that we might see on the microbiome, and I'm wondering what your comments are on these medications.
Unfortunately, in regard to the microbiome, I haven't seen anything yet. I am waiting for the other shoe to drop. This has been a very short period of time that people have been taking this. And of course, I've run across a few people that have had massive problems, wound up in hospitals with intestinal blockages and things like that from taking this. But it is a quick fix. The recent study, a few days ago, came out saying that it's good for heart disease. We may see that that's not the case, long term. These things do make me very nervous. What happens when you come off of it? The only patient I have that was on it and came off of it within a week, she gained 10 pounds. So how long can you really be on this? The rest of your life? Are they training people how to eat properly? At the same time, I don't know. So I don't have a great answer to your question. I'm just afraid of the long-term effects.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. So if we've learned anything, only have 3 cookies at lunch, don't go for the 4th. Sorry, I'm here all day. Okay, we're going to switch things up a little. We have some extra time, so we're not going to follow the order of the program, but I'm very happy to introduce Sheila Colt and Susan Keating, our ALCA New York Vice President and President, to present more information on the ALCA National merger that we mentioned before. Take it away, gals.
Okay. So bonus feature to this morning, you get to hear from us. Yeah. So just what we're going to be talking about is what I mentioned a little bit in my opening remarks about the New York chapter merging with ALCA National. And we're starting this campaign to make sure that everyone is aware. The majority of the people in this room, if you're not a member or partner yet, we're hoping you are by the end of the day. I'm going to keep pushing that message. And so we really want to get information out. There are a lot of myths. There's a lot of apprehension. And we want to make sure that we're getting facts out, making sure that members are aware of the decision that's going to be presented early next year. So Sheila, you're going to take it away. And Vivian, we're probably going to need help with slides, although I'm going to try. No.
Next slide.
Is it this green button?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, so for several years, New York ALCA, we've been weighing the benefits of a merger with ALCA National versus remaining independent. So we've done an extensive 2-year analysis. We've interviewed other merged chapters, chapters that were in the beginning of merging, and we've also spoken with National about the benefits and the disadvantages. So I'm not sure if you guys know, but New York was the original chapter back in 1981. And we have a few of the founding members that are here, Miriam Scholl and Ellen Polivi. So that is pretty cool, so impressive. December 22, the New York ALCA board, we have decided that we would favor merging. So that's why we're bringing it out to the membership to hopefully vote yes. And as Susan mentioned, the goal is to inform everyone of merger. Okay, so right now, New York ALCA is a separate business entity from National. The chapters around the country, they've chosen to merge with ALCA National for efficiencies. So right now, we're the only non-merged chapter. And then when a chapter merges, the chapter is legally dissolved and is transformed to a national committee structure.
Okay, so why on earth is the board of New York ALCA recommending this change? The first is that the chapters who merge can continue to operate with autonomy. The chapter does not lose its voice on